It feels like crises don't even wait in line anymore. They just pile on, crashing into each other, feeding off each other's energy. And what they create, it's something way more complex and way more dangerous than any single problem on its own. So today, we're going to try to make sense of it. This is your guide to the age of the polycrisis.
Okay, let's set the scene. It's late February 2026. A joint U.S.-Israeli strike takes out Iran's supreme leader. Within hours, not days, hours, Iran's Revolutionary Guard announces the Strait of Hormuz is closed. You know, that tiny choke point that a huge chunk of the world's oil flows through? Yeah, that one. Then, boom, Iranian missiles hit a civilian shelter in Israel. The UK greenlights U.S. strikes from its bases, and just like that, Qatar, a massive energy supplier, is forced to shut down its natural gas production. A regional conflict just exploded into a global crisis in less than 72 hours.
And the human cost? It's just staggering. And it's immediate. We're talking an estimated minimum of 2,400 people killed in under a week. This isn't some slow, drawn-out conflict. This is a brutal, high-speed, high-casualty event from the very first moments. It's a terrifying sign of just how high the stakes are.
So you might be thinking, this came out of nowhere, right? Well, not exactly. This didn't just pop up out of thin air. Just a month before things kicked off, analysts like Fernando Figueiredo were basically screaming from the rooftops. This quote just perfectly captures that feeling in early 2026, this sense that the world was holding its breath, and the drums of war were beating loud and clear for anyone who was actually paying attention.
But to really, truly get what's happening here, we have to pull the lens back, way back. Because this fire in the Middle East, as awful as it is, it didn't start in a vacuum. It was more like a spark that landed in a forest that was already bone dry and ready to go up in flames.
I mean, think about what else was going on at the exact same time. Donald Trump's return to the White House had shaken up the whole international system. Russia was getting bolder in Europe, sensing that maybe the U.S. didn't have Europe's back anymore. China was dialing up the pressure on Taiwan. The U.S. had just gotten directly involved in capturing the leader of Venezuela. And all the while, a horrifying civil war in Sudan had already killed over 150,000 people and displaced millions. The world was already stretched to its breaking point.
The key thing to understand is that this isn't just a string of bad luck. It's not a coincidence. What we're witnessing is something more fundamental. The very nature of risk is changing. You know those old walls that used to keep one crisis from spilling into another? Well, they're crumbling.
And look, the data totally backs this up. The World Economic Forum laid out the top global risks for 2026, and it's fascinating. You've got economic conflict, straight-up military conflict, and extreme weather events all mashed together at the very top. These aren't in separate boxes anymore. They're all intertwined, feeding into each other, making each other worse.
So what do you even call this? What's the word for when a war in the Middle East, an economic crash in Asia, and a tidal wave of online disinformation are all somehow part of the same giant tangled mess?
Well, there is a name for it, and experts are calling it the polycrisis. It's the term they're using to describe this messy, unstable, and deeply interconnected reality we're all living in right now.
Now let's be super clear here. Polycrisis isn't just a fancy word for a lot of bad stuff is happening at once. It's about how these problems interact. It's when an economic crisis makes political divisions worse, which then makes it impossible for countries to cooperate on something like a climate disaster. The end result is a cumulative impact that's way, way bigger than any single crisis on its own.
And this polycrisis plays out across 4 key areas that are constantly bumping into each other: the geopolitical, the societal, the technological, and the economic. A shock in one area sends shockwaves through all the others. So, for example, a new AI technology makes an entire industry obsolete. That's a tech shock that causes an economic shock. That job loss leads to huge social unrest and polarization, a societal shock. And that internal instability could create an opening for another country to exert influence, a geopolitical shock. See? One event cascading through the whole system.
So, okay, we have a name for it, polycrisis. But so what? Why does this label even matter? Well, it matters because a polycrisis requires a totally different mindset, a whole new way of responding to problems.
Think of it like this. A traditional crisis was like a fire in a building. It's contained. You call the fire department, they have a playbook, they put out the fire. But a polycrisis, that's like a wildfire breaking out during a hurricane. Everything is connected, everything is moving, and your old playbook is completely useless. In fact, trying to solve just one part of the problem might actually throw fuel on another part of the fire.
And here's the really scary part. We are so not ready for this. The data shows that only about a third of organizations are even bothering to update their crisis plans more than once a year. That means most are using old, outdated maps to get through this brand new, chaotic world. We are, in a lot of ways, flying blind. So if the old playbooks are out the window, what do? Well, it means we all need a completely new set of skills. It's not enough to just be an expert in one thing anymore. We need geopolitical literacy to see the big picture of power. We need to be fluent in data and AI to sift through the noise and misinformation. We need to understand behavioral science, basically why people think the way they do. And maybe most importantly, we need ethical reasoning so we can make incredibly tough calls when there are no good options left.
Now, hearing all this, it's easy to feel a little hopeless, right? But naming the problem, understanding that we're in a polycrisis, that's not about despair. It's actually the first, most crucial step toward figuring out how to build a new kind of resilience for this new kind of world.
You know, we always imagine World War III as this single catastrophic event with mushroom clouds. But what if that's not it at all? What if the next World War is, well, already happening? A war that's diffuse, hybrid, fought with economic sanctions, with technology, with information, with diplomacy. A kind of permanent low-level conflict across every domain. According to some analysts, we're already in it.
And that leaves us with the defining question for all of us, really. If our crises are interconnected, if they cascade and amplify each other, then our solutions have to do the same. If a crisis can ripple through a system and bring it down, how do we build resilience that ripples back, that strengthens our communities and our systems from the ground up? That's the challenge. That's the question the polycrisis asks of every single one of us.